Last year at ExileCon, Grinding Gear Games announced that Path of Exile 2 was no longer going to just be another patch for the game. It was in fact going to be an entirely new game running alongside the original. And a lot of people had a mixed reaction to this, and now, having played over 12 hours of Path of Exile 2, I'm here to tell you that they made the right decision. Think of it more as the difference between Mario 1 and Mario 3. Settings kind of the same, much familiarity, yet no one would claim those are the same game, and that is very apparent with everything I'm going to tell you now. We've got everything from mounts, active blocking, new combat mechanics, reworked skill gems, all that stuff, and now I'm going to show you that if you missed out on the boat of getting into Path of Exile all those years ago, Path of Exile 2 is exactly what you've been waiting for.
We got to make our own characters, play from Act 1, we had 3 classes to choose from, Ranger, Warrior and Sorc, uninterrupted for as long as the room was available. I went with Sorc because it was so dope at ExileCon, and from the very first hour it's apparent how drastically different PoE 1 and 2 are. With the huge amount of experience with the campaign a lot of the seasoned players have in PoE 1, the map clearing in 2 will be a bit slower at first, but there's a lot of optional bosses to find that don't have quests, so exploring is very, very worthwhile. And the first time you kill those optional bosses, there's also going to be bonus drops and XP to reward you for finding it and getting it done. The main thing I notice is that you have to start respecting different types of enemies from the get-go, whereas that didn't happen for me until late in the PoE 1 campaign. This is by design. White mobs aren't just things to mindlessly blow up, at least not at the start. AFK blasting will have you having your face in the mud real fast. Dodge rolling, attacking from behind, all are present to deal with just the white mobs running around, and Jonathan had this to say about it.
It's more of an action game, right? You actually have to consider what the monsters are that are attacking you. We've increased drastically the variance between monsters. So what you were referring to earlier with, like, in PoE 1, a white monster tends to be a white monster. Like, they've got pretty much similar health, similar damage, similar all sorts of stuff. In PoE 2, the difference between a white monster might be 10x, right? You've got one monster might have 10x the health of another, and then the resistances will go from like 0 to 75% for a certain element. The attack damage will go from like a tiny amount to a huge amount. Like, there should be white monsters that you would treat almost like a rare.
And a quick note about WASD movement, which all the devs at GGG seem to have moved to. I've got to be honest, it felt natural immediately. I had no problems with this, and unless your muscle memory is tied to pianoing your flasks, I think you're going to be using this as the default going forward. This does bring us to PoE 2's secret new build. Nicknamed at the event, the Wellfinder build. Flask charges are an early issue, right? Again, this is by design. White mobs don't get crushed anymore. They do decent damage to you, and they also do not give flask charges. Magic and rare packs are far rarer in Act 1, which means you will run dry depending on your build. Town portals are now completely free and endless. The towns contain wells that will fully refresh your flasks, so you regularly, at least on my Sorc's case, need to pop back to town for a second, click the well, and then run back through the portal. I'll be honest, sorry Jonathan, I did not enjoy this. I ended up using my newfound gold to buy a mana flask and then spec'd into mana recovery to simply reduce the need to pop back to town as often, rather than something that like my build needed. I really would have done some disgusting things to find some mana regen gear, and after speaking with the other players at the event, they also came up with solutions to bypass this system. The seasoned vets, they all swapped to Ranger so they could get flask recovery talents, for example. Ultimately, it just interrupted the gameplay. It got in the way of what PoE is great at, which is monstering things into the ground, and that's the standout feature of this game, to go and click a well for 2 seconds. It's also something that is probably irrelevant by Act 2 or 3 when you have the items and talents that just don't make this a thing. But Jonathan did have this opinion on it.
Buying things from the shop is important too.
I bought a mana flask.
Right, of course you should.
I did.
That's the intention. That's the intention.
It felt mad.
But that's actually what you're supposed to do. Like, you're actually supposed to buy flasks to upgrade them, and like you'll notice that all of the items in the shop are much better than they were in PoE. You can actually buy blues and stuff in there, and like that stuff. That's actually an important part.
I do have to agree with him on one thing. Resource management on bosses in PoE 2 is vital, even in Act 1. Whether this matters late game, we don't know. But man, these bosses are amazing.
So one thing from that previous interview, actually, that one of my developers came to me and said, I think regarding your interview, and they said that he thought that players were misunderstanding what I meant by the fact that you should die to bosses. And because what I was meaning was that, okay, it takes a couple of deaths to learn the mechanics and understand and play, but the next time you play through the game, you already know the mechanics. You can probably defeat it first time.
Well,
but I think what people were thinking that I meant was that, oh, like every time you approach the boss, even when you're repeating that you die multiple times. But I don't think that's the case.
I can clear that up right now. That is not the case. Right. And I think the boss that probably shows that the most that you've shown today is the Devourer,
right.
Which I died to a couple of times. This is all things that might seem silly, but this is not something you apply to PoE 1 until late game.
Well, I think the reason for that is just because the boss design in PoE 1 wasn't good until later in development. And so all of the campaign bosses in PoE 1 just aren't as good as the ones we made later. And so now effectively we've got the same guy who's making in-game PoE 1 bosses is now making early-game PoE 2 bosses. And it just means that they're mechanically so much more interesting.
Yeah, there was definitely someone next to me who was getting very angry with the Devourer. he was looking at me like...
He's not joking. You're going to find so many good mechanics early on. There's line of sight, positioning, audio cues are all very, very relevant from the get-go. This is like Act 1 PoE 2 feels like late mid-game PoE 1. They're also changing how gear and gems are supplied from the start of the game. This time, though, they're going to focus on teaching people about crafting really early, rather than being burdened with a load of options later on when the player may have been taught or become accustomed to just having upgrades drop every few minutes of leveling up. In Act 1, the drops are primarily white items, especially given the reduction of magic and rare monsters. However, you get lots and lots of augmentation and transmute orbs. The idea is that with less just general drops to stick on your character, you're going to start manually modifying your items from the very start of the game. And I loved this. Once I changed my mindset that currency wasn't just something to throw in the stash until later on, and now it's something I can actively use while I'm playing the game, I had a far better time. Similar story with gems. You're still going to get significant gem tier upgrades from quests like you would do in PoE 1, but now all the other gems will be dropping in the world pre-leveled. So you aren't always just going to be starting from level 1 and just waiting for them to do something useful. They're also going to change the chromatic orbs as well. In the build I played, they would just randomly change one of the colors of the gem slots, so kind of like PoE 1. However, this is also going to change so you can choose specifically what color you would like, so they have to give less chromatic orbs in general. The only downside is in the playtime I had, no really good augments from my spells dropped at all, and it led to me not feeling really any power gain even while entering the mana at the end of the act. It's something that's easily tweaked in future builds, as talking to the other players, some people got quite a few, other people didn't get any. Let's move on to checkpoints for a second. Seeing a checkpoint in the map is a warning and really exciting. It means you've found a boss. You can head back to town really fast because you've had this warning, refresh, click the well, and get ready. First time pulls will typically involve a death or two to figure out what the hell is happening. This is again intended. Reclears though in the future will likely be one-shots, as you know the fight by then, and they definitely focus more on mechanics than they do on just blasting it into the ground. This is intended to just engage you and feel rewarding. In PoE 2 though, when you die, you respawn directly at the checkpoint in front of the boss. It's essentially as if you dropped a town portal before every boss door. However, this does cause the map to respawn all the enemies in it, although the map layout itself won't change. I loved this. When learning a boss, my focus is on it fully and I want to defeat it, so this no run back idea was great. However, I'm also a former Mythic Raider of like 20 years, and doing ridiculously hard bosses and wiping over and over again is in my blood. So I do have concerns that players who get stuck on a boss, and this did happen to several people at the event, may feel like this is their progression point and keep smashing their heads into it and getting themselves frustrated. Especially if they are new and they don't realize that maybe this is an optional boss and they don't have to do it. You keep spawning in front of it. The idea is that if you do get stuck, you go and do other things, or perhaps grind out some XP and gear and come back a little bit later. I just know though, some players who are just spawning back at the boss door over and over again are going to feel like this is where they should be and they can't do it and they're just going to give up. But time is going to tell on that one, my friends. One thing is really clear after playing this. PoE 2 is director Jonathan Rogers' vision. In his words, it's what he wished they could have done in PoE 1 if the tech and resources was there. Jonathan obviously draws inspiration from the best of the best combat games out there. The drive is for the player to be on an adventure, to face hardships and struggles, and then overcome with a satisfaction that is worthy of the effort they put in, even from the beginning of the game. It's a really difficult line to walk, as the skill, as we know amongst players, is wildly different.
The message was resoundingly clear in Los Angeles after everybody had played PoE 2. The differences are stark, they're noticeable. Some things people like, some things they don't like, and obviously constant comparison to PoE 1. And it's something that people are going to have to let go of. Stop comparing everything side by side, because remember, PoE 1 is right there. If you don't like the things in 2, or you prefer the ones in 1, no problem. Me personally, PoE 2 is right up my street. As somebody who likes figuring out mechanics, likes figuring out bosses, and likes working in wars of attrition, that is great for me. And it's that fresh start that I've been looking for without having to learn hours and hours and hours of videos before jumping into the end game of PoE 1. I'm really excited for this. I think it's going to do well, but I'm certainly aware that a lot of the classic and old school entrenched PoE 1 players might look at this with a skeptical eye. But that's okay, because everything's still there for you anyway. I've been Preach. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again.